over 3 years. So I am a CPT and a coach. I am based in Vancouver, specifically in North Vancouver. And I also work at my local boxing gym doing some community outreach and engagement. So as many of you know, I have a great affinity for boxing. I also have a great affinity for kettlebells, and I have been vegan for 14 years this December. My unique circumstances as of present, as some of you may be aware, there are some pretty extreme forest fires happening at multiple places throughout Canada, unfortunately. One of the biggest ones right now is on Vancouver Island at a place called Cameron Lake, which is almost the halfway point between Vancouver and Tofino, which is a very popular vacation resort spot. I was on my way back from Tofino when this all transpired. So I am currently hunkered down in Port Alberni, which is a very small and unique and lovely place. So that is where I am reporting to you from today. If my background looks a little bit different, that is why.
Makes sense. Yeah, so the highway is actually closed. So Coach Zoe has no option for leaving, right? Like the whole highway up to possibly 6 days is
Yes, and there is, thank you for mentioning that, because I
yeah.
realize now I didn't, and that was critical information. There is a logging road, however, it is just that, it is a logging road. So unfortunately, it has already seen a lot of folks who are on it who should not be, and there's been a couple of flipped cars and trucks. So we are staying put and exploring a new place, and who knows what will happen. Making the best of it.
We're making the best of the situation. Megan says, "Hope you're safe, Kozo." Kozo is, by the
Thank
way,
you.
Zoe's official new nickname, Coach Zoe, Kozo.
Which
Okay,
Megan coined, and somehow no one had
I'd thought of
tuned into
before.
that incredible nickname before.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so for folks who don't know me, Karina Inkster, aka Coach K, I'll do a little presentation later on processed foods, which is a huge topic. For those who haven't tuned in to the No BS Vegan podcast, that's my thing. It's a lot of really amazing guests who are talking on, a scientific basis about veganism and fitness, strength training, BS busting in the whole realm. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I will put that in the chat, just the direct link to all the episodes. But let's get started with Kozo on busting some myths around soy, because everyone who's been vegan for more than 5 minutes has heard someone say, oh, but soy is going to do A or B, or oh, I stay away from soy because C. So let's get into it.
Okay, so acknowledging that we have limited time, and also acknowledging that this is definitely one subject area where we could spend much more than just under an hour talking about it. I have streamlined this for us today. So I'm going to talk a little bit, pardon me, about 3 of the most pervasive myths about soy. I would bet a couple of dollars that you have all seen them before. And friendly reminder, if any questions come up during the information that I'm presenting, throw them in the chat, and I may not answer them immediately, but we'll come back to the chat at the end and make sure that everyone's questions are addressed, okay? I will also offer a bit of a disclaimer. Because of my unique setup, I'm also in a room with some unique lighting. So if we have some flashes like that, It's completely unplanned, but I hope it adds some flair to the presentation.
It's very disco light-esque. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
I think I can, oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. So, number one, and just for kicks, if you have your camera on, put your hand up if you've heard this or something, similar to this myth. And that is that soy consumption will increase your risk for cancer, specifically increase your risk for breast cancer. You've heard rumblings on this before. Okay. So let's give a little bit of a backstory and context as to where this belief came from. So soy and some other foods, which I will touch on shortly, have a natural compound in them called isoflavones. And the chemical structure of those is very similar to estrogens. And when we talk about soy specifically, we call them phytoestrogens. So phyto being plant. So we have plant estrogens. A lot of the time, and I think this happens with many subjects when we're, reading articles online and we're only glancing at the headline perhaps, or the opening few sentences, is a lot of folks may see the word phytoestrogens, but they only really pull out and they really only focus on the estrogen part of that. Okay, so phytoestrogens on this side and estrogens are not the same. Phytoestrogens we find specifically in plants. Estrogen comes from humans and or non-human animals. So that's over here on that side. As I mentioned in my first point, soy, unbeknownst to some, is not the only thing that has phytoestrogens in it. Pops have phytoestrogens in them rather. So for a lot of the folks who may fall into this theory, a lot of the time perhaps it is men who have a specific worry about the mythical man breast growth that will come from soy. One of the points that we can return to those folks is, well, it's very possible that if you are a beer drinker, you should actually be equally concerned because pops also have phytoestrogens in it. But in actuality, there is no concern, right? Veggies, fruits, apples have phytoestrogens in them. This is touched on in a podcast episode, which we will link to. And Coach K actually speaks about some of her research on other things that have phytoestrogens in them. Ramen and pistachios. Okay, so it's a very, very expansive list. And I did not list all of them. So that's just one chunk of all of the places where we'll find them. Because we're talking about two different things, it means that the chemical structure of phytoestrogens and the chemical structure of estrogens is completely different. So how they attach to receptors in our bodies and how they engage with certain systems and cells and everything in our bodies is going to be completely different. So estrogen, excess estrogen consumption, perhaps coming from something like animal products, may have negative impacts on breast tissue. So this is, speaking to the myth around soy causing breast cancer. Phytoestrogens actually have positive effects on breast tissue. So I'm going to read a few stats about some studies which have some very, very poignant and impressive numbers. In 2008, researchers combined the results of 8 prior studies on the relationship between soy products and breast cancer, finding that women who had the most soy, so this might be soy milk, tofu, etc., were actually 29% less likely to develop breast cancer compared with women who ate little or no soy products at all. In 2014, so 5 years after that primary study, Researchers looked again. This time they combined the results of 35 previous studies. So they really just expanded that pool. And again, soy had a hugely preventative effect, cutting breast cancer risk by 41%, which is huge, being almost 50%. In the podcast episode with Coach K, which I referenced earlier and which we'll be sharing, Dr. Melissa Riley, and I will share some information about her at the end. She actually references that at that point in her career, she had yet to find one conclusive study that indicated soy definitely causes cancer. And that was definitely one point from the podcast which stood out the most for me. So we're going to jump to point number 2, which I kind of hinted about in point number 1. And that is that soy consumption will cause you to grow larger breasts, or if you are a man, they will cause you to grow what is casually referred to as man boobs. Okay, so soy products have no adverse effect on men and may actually almost help prevent cancer in men as well. We spoke about this point in the previous section. We have estrogen in animal products and we have phytoestrogens in plants. So if someone was expressing concern about having man boobs, I would actually put on the table that folks who are consuming animal products, specifically dairy products, because they do have the highest volume of estrogen in milk, I would say that folks who are consuming those products should actually shift their concern to that area because there will be estrogen present in those products. Interestingly, and I will not go too far into this because it could definitely be for another day, but some of you know that I have a marketing background as well. And a really, really interesting thing about this myth specifically is some of the same marketing channels who spread a pervasive message like this, so soy causes man boob or breast growth, are the same ones who also encourage, this notion of enhanced or heightened masculinity through the consumption of meat for men. So that's just a little bit of an interesting time. Gender norms are absurd. Gender stereotypes are absurd, but it's very interesting to observe, the groups and the organizations here who have vested interests and see how that impacts what they're marketing and also what kind of messaging they're putting out there as well. We reference an analysis of 14 studies, which was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And that showed that increased intake of soy resulted in a 26% reduction of prostate cancer in men. Okay. There was also a 30% risk reduction with non-fermented soy products, such as soy milk and tofu. How I always like to conclude this myth as well, talking about the notion that soy will cause breast growth for men or anyone really. I have been vegan for almost 14 years. I drink soy milk every day and eat at least a brick or two of tofu. And I can say confidently that if this was a factual thing that happened, there would be a lot more people hopping on the soy and the tofu train. And in 14 years, there has not been much change. So that is belief enough for me. And the last one, and we'll kind of spin a little bit into Coach K's portion with this, is soy is super duper processed and ripe with GMOs, right? So number one, and Coach K will expand on this, so I'm just going to say this one point and then cut myself off. When we talk about the term processed, especially the term processed in relation to food, it is used so much, but it is so vague. What is the definition of processed? What or who is the entity or organization that's going to define what is a processed food and what is not? Okay, so pin that over here because Coach K will talk a little bit more about that. Most folks don't know that soy is something which has been consumed for over 1,000 years. So we look at many other places around the world, we look at many other cultures, and these cultures have long-standing, expansive, and really healthy relationships with soy. So where did the bad rap come from? Exactly. Number one, we need to look at terminology. So that's when we hop back to point number one, that word phytoestrogens, and how certain entities have strategically chosen to lean into the estrogen part and kind of create some inaccurate rhetoric. Number two, soy has been lumped in as a processed food. And again, a lot of the time when we see the word processed used in food and nutrition circles, it is being cast in a negative light, and processed food is being demonized, which is problematic for several reasons, which Coach K will address. And then the third one is the discussion of GMOs in relation to soy products, when in actuality, the majority of GMO soy products, because there are some that do exist, the majority of those products are the ones being grown to feed to the animals, which are being raised for human consumption. But when it comes to most of the soy meant for human consumption, it's non-GMO by default. Okay. So again, the meat industry is aware of this, but that's another point that they can take and perhaps pivot and spin a bit strategically to market in a different light. So for everyone's reference, a few of the numbers and the statistics I talked about today came from the podcast episodes that Coach K has posted here. So that is one with Susan Levin, who is the Director of Nutrition Education at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. We have Dr. Melissa Riley, who is a clinical assistant professor of pharmacy practice and a clinical pharmacist. And then I pulled some information from Dr. Matthew Nigra, who is a Vancouver-based vegan naturopathic doctor. And that is the end of portion number one for you folks.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And by the way, folks who may be questioning the naturopathic doctor thing there, Matt Nigra is probably the only naturopath I will ever have on the podcast. And he is one of the best folks I've ever seen at explaining research results. So on Instagram and on Facebook, he has amazing followings and really good videos where he takes a peer-reviewed study and explains the methodology and was it sound? What did the study find? What does it tell us? You know, that kind of stuff. He's amazing at that.
Very, very accessible.
Yeah. So he's definitely someone to follow in the evidence-based veganism world. He does a lot of speaking at like veg expos and things like that. Yeah, he's awesome. So let's talk about processed food. And this is something I'm working on right now, actually, for a podcast episode and an article. So you're getting kind of a sneak peek on some of the stuff that's going to come out soon. And the reason we decided to talk about processed foods is because we as coaches have a lot of discussions about nutrition and how to make sure that our diet in general is supporting our fitness goals and our health goals. And 99% of the time that we have discussions like this, the term processed foods comes up. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It doesn't have a basic definition. But I think within veganism specifically, not just the diet industry or nutrition or fitness, but within veganism, there's this concept of like the way to do veganism right is to eat whole foods and nothing but whole foods, which, by the way, are not well defined either. So I want to share a message that we got. I won't name names, obviously, but a message that we got from one of our clients about processed foods and kind of like what my thought process is in getting a message like this. Okay, so here's the message. It was as part of a check-in. We're in touch with our clients a lot and they send us check-ins. We've got a lot of touch points. So this client said, what I'm coming up against this week is getting enough protein. I've been eating mostly beans and vegetables, but now I'm at risk of not having much energy, which is the reason why I've always had trouble maintaining an exercise regimen on a vegan diet. So I thought, okay, I'll go to have seitan. But with all my knowledge on nutrition and how food works in the body, I got concerned about it because it's highly processed, and anything not in its natural form means the body misses out on it as a complete food. I Googled if it's okay to eat seitan every day, and there's not much info, but I feel intuitively that it's not great. So that means I need to add in some tofu, and I'm having a bit of a moment over here stressing that I'm never going to be able to get enough nutrients and protein if I try and bring it back to whole unprocessed plant foods. So that was the client message. Now I have a lot of thoughts on this, most of which are around systemic issues in the diet industry and veganism. Like somehow we have become afraid of tofu. Like that's a thing now, apparently. So some of the things I'm thinking here are like on a large scale, since when is tofu something we should avoid? Or seitan for that matter, which has also been eaten for thousands of years. And then on the other hand, how much mental energy is taken up for this person? Not just worrying about tofu or seitan, but trying to have this so-called perfect whole foods diet and literally thinking about everything in these terms. Is it good? Is it bad? Right? And what does that even mean? So on that note, just generally in the nutrition world, but like I said, I feel like it's especially in the vegan world, and you may or may not agree, let us know in the comments. There's this belief that, in order to achieve this highest level of health, the only way to do that is to only eat whole unprocessed foods. And nobody defines what unprocessed is. So then we have folks like our client here who believe that tofu is highly processed and shouldn't be eaten because it's not a whole food. So for a lot of folks in this no processed foods at all camp, things like soy milk and your plant-based meats, like seitan, for example, are off the table because they're supposedly processed. And like we've mentioned, these foods have been produced and they've been consumed for centuries and centuries by populations across the globe. And there's no evidence legitimately to suggest that those things have negative health consequences, right? So what I think happened here is what we refer to as processed foods and why they're associated with negative health consequences when they're eaten in huge amounts, of course, and when they're eaten to the exclusion of any whole foods, is because we're usually thinking about ultra processed foods. Have you all heard the term ultra processed? Ultra processed, I think we all can understand what that means, right? They generally contain additives like colors and sugars and oils or preservatives. They're often made from like extracts, substances that are extracted from foods, fats, starches, hydrogenated fats, stuff like that. And so we do know that a really high intake of ultra processed foods, again, to the exclusion of other types of whole foods, that is associated with an increased risk of diabetes and heart disease and other things like that. However, there's no research that shows that supposedly processed foods like plant-based meats or non-dairy milk or nut butter or bread or vegan yogurts, or even things like no sugar, like flavored waters, that kind of stuff. There's no evidence that shows that those things have any sort of negative health effects, but I think they've been lumped in with the ultra processed foods. And that might be where this fear of all supposedly processed foods comes from, right? So we've somehow arrived at this belief that any processing of a food means it's inferior to a raw food or a whole food in its regular state. So that could be part of it. I feel like it might be helpful to use terms like minimally processed for things that we all kind of inherently know are really nutrient dense, fruits, vegetables, grains, etc. And then I also think, honestly, part of the problem is large scale organizations, possibly including Forks Over Knives, who promote this very exclusionary way of like no oil, no sugar, no salt. It's not accessible to most folks, I would say. And it's also not necessarily rooted in health for the population. You know, if you're an individual who is severely at risk of having a heart attack in the next 24 hours, sure, your nutrition might look a certain way, but that doesn't mean that the entire population needs to eat like that. So the idea that we need to eat food in only its natural form, it's called an appeal to nature fallacy or the natural fallacy. Does that term ring a bell for folks? Natural fallacy. Basically what it is, it's this concept that if it's natural, it must be healthier for us. And so this is why the term natural has become a marketing term, right? Coach Zoe is in marketing. So if you see the word natural on a package of food, it doesn't really mean a ton because there's no definition of that either. But, you know, there's no definition of what natural means. The produce that we eat today, any produce, apples, broccoli, asparagus, it's been selectively bred for generations and generations. It has no resemblance to the original plant species that humans would have consumed earlier in our history. So, I mean, is that natural? It's a marketing term these days. And, you know, the logic of, well, if it's natural, it has to be healthier for us is just not accurate because our bodies recognize molecules and chemicals and nutrients, not whether a food is in its original form or not. And a lot of natural, in quotes, foods are real dangerous for us, right? Think of like wild mushrooms. You're not just going to randomly go and pick a mushroom if you're not 110% sure what that thing is. There's toxins that are natural. There's all sorts of things that are inherent in the plant kingdom, but aren't meant for us to consume. Cyanide occurs naturally. There's actually a lot of cyanide poisoning that happens in cultures that eat cassava a lot, because if you don't cook it properly, it's got cyanide in it. So anyway, that's the natural fallacy concept. And I also want to point out that within this population of folks who honestly have been taught from a larger system that all processed foods are bad, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And one of the examples that I see is soy curls. Are we all familiar with soy curls? They're kind of like extruded little TVP-like meaty, yeah, they're like delicious, right? Megan, yes. So soy curls, by a lot of folks, are viewed as being processed, but they're made from whole soybeans that have been cooked and pressed and dried, which, by the way, is the exact same process for making rolled oats. And most people think rolled oats are whole foods. They make their overnight oats. They're totally cool with it. So it's the same process, essentially, both one ingredient, but for some reason, one of them has been labeled as processed and the other one isn't. So, you know, it's very gray area-y, if that's a word. And legume-based pastas are another example. Are we all familiar with pasta made from chickpeas or red lentils or edamame? Fantastic source of protein. They're really high in protein. They're one ingredient, super simple. But again, folks are in this camp of, well, it's been through some kind of a process, so it must be a processed food, so it must make it bad, are shying away from foods like this, and they're missing out, unfortunately. So we can talk more in detail on, you know, like how should we approach this? How should we define foods that are health promoting versus maybe not? And there's a lot of nuance in there too, right? Because I have people who, you know, friends and family members who have things like celiac disease or Crohn's disease. And on an individual basis, sometimes the more highly processed foods are actually better. they're more positive, they're more easily absorbed, all this kind of stuff. But overall, tofu specifically, bringing it back to what our client was saying about, essentially the fear of tofu. Tofu is a really good source of protein. And I have to share that my current favorite source of protein is tofu made from fava beans. Has anyone tried this? This is like news to me. So it's the same process. It's Coach Zoe might be able to put a link in the chat to the brand. We have a Canadian female-owned company who makes tofu traditionally, but instead of soy, it's made with fava beans. And in one like regular size block of this tofu, there's 60 grams of protein, which is mind-blowing. It's really good. So you can air fry it. I eat the smoked stuff just like by itself on salad. Again, one ingredient, traditionally made, super excellent. What? Says Yvette. Yeah, I know. It's mind-blowing. So that's your protein intel for today. The legume-based pastas, if you're not doing those already, and tofu made from fava beans. It's like the texture is amazing. You can use it as you would normally with tofu. It's something like 2 to 3 times higher in protein than soy-based tofu is. So it's a little powerhouse. Oh yeah, there's one more example that I have. Anyone who's been vegan for more than 3 minutes has known and loved nutritional yeast, right? We use that stuff on like everything, yeah? So nutritional yeast generally, because it's really high in B12 and lots of micronutrients, most of the time it's seen as like a high protein food, generally viewed by nutrition professionals and the public as really healthy. I don't like using the term like healthy, unhealthy, whatever. A lot of people will consider it a whole food, but it's made in a lab. In case folks don't know that, does that make it a bad food? Definitely not. It's one of the best sources of B12 in our diets, right? So I think we need to embrace gray areas. We need to step away from the 100% perfect, you're doing vegan wrong if you're not eating only whole foods mindset, because I think it's pretty harmful and inaccurate for our health, actually. And we might need a larger discussion about processed foods in the fitness industry and in veganism, because what it's leading to is a lot of fear about, this food is not going to be in line with my health goals. It's not going to be in line with my fitness goals. And it's taking up a lot of mental space for people thinking about this thing. Now, do we assume that we can just like hang out and eat only Oreos all day and hit our health goals? Unfortunately not, as delicious as they are. I mean, I love Oreos. So the things that work, like consistency and moderation, first of all, are boring. And second, don't sell, right? So the people out there with like their programs or their 30-day cleanses or whatnot have to make it exciting because that's what sells. But what actually works is consistency, moderation, boring shit that we all know works but isn't going to sell a million copies of a diet book, right? I always say if fitness coaches posted on Instagram what their actual training looked like and what their actual diets looked like, no one would care. They would have 0 followers because it's boring. It's the same thing day in, day out. My mentor, John Goodman, always says, same shit, different shirt. It's like just day in, day out, same shit, different shirt. So the stuff that sells is exciting. It's fear-based. And I think that's tied into a lot of these ideas about processed foods and soy and things that we're busting myths around. So let's jump into some questions. Do you have any, Coach Zoe, that you've pulled out? I'm just going to scroll up and do a quick review here.
Yeah, so yes to questions. And I would just like to add kind of a follow-up piece to what you spoke about. This goes without say. And obviously, if there are folks here or if there are folks who are watching this after the fact who do follow a whole food plant-based diet, we are not in a position where we are saying, no, you should not be doing that. Our criticisms come when certain things such as that are framed as the only way that a human can engage with veganism or plant-based food, and framed in a way that indicates, that's the best way to do it, and that the other options are the bad ones, right? And we will, all have certain perhaps medical backgrounds and histories. And there may be folks where eating a higher volume of oil is not recommended for you. So we also acknowledge that when we talk about certain subjects, there will be exceptions, and we see those exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I will talk about Nelson's question, which we kind of touched on a little bit before, and that is why do you think the demonization of soy products happens? Well, how much time do you have? But
well, Megan has a good point. Megan says because it's not dairy/meat.
It's not dairy/meat. Accurate. And I would say, going back to one of the points that I talked about in the first portion, that soy and soy consumption for humans is not a new thing. However, I really see the demonization of soy and the shifted perception of soy coming into play around the same time that everyone got super excited about the estrogen conversation, specifically the phytoestrogen conversation. But it was really that piece that triggered a few strong responses. And I think certain institutions saw that and then chose to adopt that into their messaging. It is not exclusive to these industries, but it is important to acknowledge that some of the entities who are putting out misinformation about soy and framing it as something negative and something we should be demonizing are in fact industries which fall within big animal agriculture. And I think an element of that response perhaps is actually coming from a place of fear, because there are animal agriculture industries who see, the onslaught of very, very, very positive plant-based transitions happening. And I think that is one of the ways that they choose to respond to it, even if it is not based in fact and quite sensationalized.
That's a great point.
Stay tuned for a workshop all about the marketing of soy.
Exactly. Well, that's a good point, because if you think about a campaign like Got Milk, right, where it's the dairy industry who has a vested interest in making us drink milk, telling us that cow's milk is supposedly healthy. There's also other pieces, like, did you see this thing with Aubrey Plaza recently? This whole controversy, don't even get me started, but she was part of the Got Milk campaign and then also starred in this fake commercial for Wood Milk. And it's supposedly, kicking the shit out of all plant-based milks, like they're not real and they're not nutritional and whatever. So a lot of it is marketing, a lot of it is money, a lot of it is industry. Like the dairy industry is subsidized very largely. You don't see that for the broccoli industry. So
not yet.
Yeah. So yeah, but I think it's a lot of things, and that could be said for pretty much any myth in nutrition, I would say. But Kathy has a question here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just for anyone who wants to research it more, because I know it's kind of a niche area of interest. If you look at all of the animal agriculture industries across Canada, specifically within BC dairy receives the most government subsidies of all of the sectors combined, and also wastes the most in terms of product. So again, just to kind of reiterate what Coach K said about who has the money to market certain messages and what they're choosing to share.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we have 2 quick questions here, and then if folks have more questions, if you want to unmute yourself and say hi on camera, that's cool, or you can jump into the chat, whatever you like. So Kathy's wondering, What's your opinion on plant-based meats like Beyond Meat and Eve Veggie Ground Round? Do you eat them? How processed would you consider them? So this is a good question because I actually think those two are very different. So I'll give you my real quick answer. The Beyond Meat, you know what? I have it open here. I'm going to link in our chat. This is something to check out later. So this is an interview on the podcast specifically about the Beyond and Impossible burgers. So they were formulated to basically taste and look and act as close to animal meat as possible. So they're not formulated to be like a health product, which is not necessarily a negative thing. But the whole point in like figuring out what a Beyond Burger or what an Impossible Burger was going to contain was, oh, well, it needs saturated fat because meat has saturated fat. Oh, and it needs this percentage of protein because meat has this percentage of protein. So they're kind of like made to be a realistic meat replica. So it is fairly highly processed, again in quotes. Does that necessarily mean that it's going to negatively affect our health? No, because you need to look at context. What else are you eating? You know, if you eat one Beyond Burger and the rest of your day is 80% whole foods, that's not an issue. I'll eat a Beyond Burger every 2 weeks, probably. We'll have date night. We'll like grill up some burgers. They're really good with caramelized onions. It's like next level. Now, am I eating that as my sole source of protein? No, not in this case. I think things like Eve, if y'all are familiar with the Eve Veggie Ground Round or just the Eve brand in general, they're kind of doing their own thing. They're not necessarily trying to like exactly molecularly replicate meat. I don't know if that's better or worse, but they're just different products. And so I use Veggie Ground Round from them specifically a lot, actually. We have a giant pot of chili right now that my husband made, and it's got that in it. So we're eating it all week, like probably all weekdays. So it kind of depends. The answer is always it depends, right? If you're only eating these things, you're probably missing out on micronutrients. But if you're adding them in with other, you know, good food habits, I think they can be part of a well-rounded diet for sure. Unless there's some legitimate like allergy or something. Where are you at with the Beyond Burgers and Eve cuisine and stuff? Yes, you, Coach Zoe.
I have nothing to add on to, because if I would have answered that question first, I would have answered it in the exact same way that you did. I think they're fantastic. I have them at home once in a while. I love the fact that it's become a good default for restaurants. And even if you're at a place where they may not have an abundance of vegan options, you know that you can get a decent burger. And they've become really accessible, and I would say really celebrated by non-veg folk as well. So I think they definitely serve an important role.
That's a good point. That's the piece that I missed, that for folks who are, you know, there's a lot of people who are making the transition for reasons other than meat doesn't taste good. I mean, I didn't go vegan because I thought animal products tasted bad, right? And so these can help with that side of things for sure. Yeah. Eric has a quick question. Has anyone ever made fava tofu at home? I've never made regular tofu, although I have a friend who has made her own tofu. Has anyone here, just put it in the chat if you have. Has anyone made soy-based tofu before? I only know one person who's made their own tofu. But if so, that's pretty next level. That's beyond my interest in food prep. I have to say. Probably not here. Okay, does anyone want to jump on either the chat or... Oh yeah, I'd be intimidated, says Eric. Yeah, I would be too, for sure. Although my friend says it wasn't too complicated, but I would just buy it because I know what I'm getting. Does anyone want to jump onto the audio and ask a question that way? Anything we're missing, burning questions around either processed foods or soy or anything else? Or just want to say hi? I haven't seen Yvette for a while. Hi.
Well, you know, it's funny that this is Yvette from Tampa, Florida. You know, some of the candy companies, like during Halloween, they push, candy, but they also now you hear them saying, oh, well, this candy and that candy's vegan, So, there's certain foods that are already vegan. So.
Mhm. That's true. By the way, everyone, Yvette has been vegan for over 40 years, just so y'all
Yeah,
know.
I was actually doing the math when I heard what you said, Zoe. I actually was 20 years old when I went vegan, and that was in 1976. And
Wow.
I have been 47 years a vegan now.
So you're closer to 5 decades now vegan. Dude, that's amazing.
Almost, yeah, like if you think about it.
That is
Yeah,
amazing.
we are throwing a
And
party.
I actually originally, when I decided to, like, when I realized, oh my God, these animals are getting killed to eat this meat, I was 10 years old. And I
Wow.
was at one of my family lived in Austria, and we were at their farm. And it
Mm.
was my mother's side of the family. And in the morning that day, and they speak German, and so like as little kids, we kind of understood it, but we really didn't know what they were saying. But this one morning, they come in with this chicken, and they had
Aw.
it in the kitchen, and they're like passing it around and talking about this chicken, and I'm like petting it myself. And then later on in the afternoon, I look out the window, and my uncle is out there on the chopping block,
Aw.
cutting the head of the chicken off. And I
Horrible.
refused to eat the chicken that night. And after that, it just changed my whole perception of meat. Like I didn't even want to eat meat anymore. And my parents, of course, made me by
Mm.
threatening if I didn't eat, I wouldn't get anything. So, but once I was out of my parents' house and on my own, I basically investigated how to be a vegan, and I just followed that path.
That's amazing. Well, kudos to you for almost 5 decades. And I'm with Coach Zoe. We got to throw a 50-year
Thank you.
big
And it's
anniversary
really
party
for
in
the
2 years from
animals. That's the biggest platform that I can say that the reason I do it is for the animals.
now. 100%. Well, thanks for sharing,
So
Yvette.
you're
Seriously.
welcome.
Amazing. Okay, Megan. Megan's next. Megan and Brimley, actually.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Every computer is a little bit different in terms of the name that shows up. So it just depends on which computer I log in from. I had this experience on the weekend. I went to an all vegan restaurant here in Calgary that also hosts a drag show every Saturday night, and actually various drag throughout the week, which is amazing. We went for my friend's 40th birthday, and I wanted to get a pizza because they have amazing pizza there with soy curls.
Nice.
And my friend and I were going to split it, and she was like, well, anything without soy, because it really just doesn't make me feel good. And so just wondering like what your thoughts are on, I mean, Coach K, I know you have a lot of allergies and don't think soy is one of them. Obviously, you wouldn't be eating blocks of tofu from a fork in the park. But what are your thoughts on like when people just, like don't feel good eating soy? Like what might be causing that, or do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a great question, Megan. I'll just do a quick, as the allergy medical case in the Zoom room here. I do have a lot of food allergies, and they're related to really bad seasonal allergies like the pollen. So things from trees, things from grass. My body basically thinks anything tree related is like reason to go into anaphylactic shock, essentially. So tree nuts, the only nuts I can have are peanuts because they're legumes technically. Mind you, peanuts are delicious and they're their own food group, so that's great. But no almonds, no macadamias, no pine nuts, and no raw fruit. Oh, Megan says same with her dad. Interesting. Yeah, it's actually pretty common to have allergies that are related to like seasonal allergies. It's not common to have to carry an EpiPen on your person at all times because of this. It's like next level. But anyways, this whole discussion about soy and processed foods did not touch on individual differences, right? So if there's a food that makes us react in a negative way, there's intolerances, there are like digestive conditions folks can have. Those are all legitimate reasons to not eat a food, for sure. Or you just don't like it. That is also a legitimate reason to not eat a food. So, we're not registered dietitians, so I don't think we can speculate on like why the soy would make someone not feel great. Could be digestive, could be an allergy of some kind. And those things are legit for sure. And so I think those are important to keep in mind.
Do we want to bounce Elayne? Would you like to ask or type, whichever you prefer?
Yeah, no, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi.
Hi. So I have been into tracking my macros and calories lately, and I get tofu and it comes packaged with a lot of liquid. And, I drain the liquid and press my tofu for a lot of recipes. And I'm just feeling like when I record it and then weigh it, that I don't know that I'm getting the right data from that. Like when the package doesn't separate the liquid from the solid, and what I eat has a lot less volume and weight than what the package has. And I don't know if you have any insight in what the stats really might be in terms of what I'm actually eating.
That's a good question. Okay, so Elayne, one thing to keep in mind is that legally, nutrition labels are allowed to be off by 20% in calories, right? So that's kind of the first piece, is they could be 20% down or 20% up. That's a lot. They're not allowed to do that with the nutrition info like B12 and zinc and iron and stuff. That has to be accurate.
Okay.
But it's really hard to measure calories, which is why the variation. But I'm not really sure. I think the water doesn't have any calories in it.
Right.
Right? So it would be helpful if they did it by weight of the actual block.
It would. Yeah. All right. So I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know if anybody has any insight. I don't feel bad if you don't know the answer, because it's kind of a tricky one. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
No worries.
I follow you and really enjoy all your wonderful information and your fantastic attitude and all of the things that you do for everyone. So thank you.
Well, thanks for tuning in, and nice to meet you too. Okay, so we got time. If there's one or two more folks, we're going to need to go in 4 minutes. Any last minute burning questions?
I have a burning question / comment / request. If anyone has any subject areas that you would love to see featured in a future edition of this workshop series, please throw them in the chat and or let us know at any time via email or social media as well.
Good call. Yeah. Because we kind of just base things on like the discussions we're having with clients, or topics that come up, like the Got Milk campaign this past week that has been a whole controversy. Stuff like that. Okay, and I also want to paste in one more thing into the chat here. If you've been in our previous workshops, you already know that we do a kind of short-term, if you want to be on our client team type of deal. So I'm going to paste in a link into our chat here. Oh, here's a topic proposal from Eric. Nice, thanks, Eric. I'm going to paste that actually into a document here. Anyways, I just linked to our coaching programs. So we do have a few spots available for folks. A lot of the folks on the call are already on our team, so thank you, y'all, for joining. But what we do with the workshops is, if you're a new prospective client, you want to join the team, and you were on the workshop, if you submit your application to become a new client at some point in the next 48 hours, it doesn't matter when you book your consult call. It can be in 2 or 3 weeks from now if you want. But if your application is in and you were on this call in the next 48 hours, then when you do end up signing up for your program, we will give you a 15% off little thanks for coming to the workshop thing. So in case it's on the radar, if you want to do strength training, kicking some butt with your vegan nutrition, you don't have to be fully vegan, but as you know, we are. So by default, all of our resources and our whole team and everything is completely plant-based. So yeah, just throwing it out there. The page with our programs is linked in our chat, and you can look through, see what our programs are, and then there's an apply button. So as long as the application is through the interwebs and into our inboxes in the next 2 days, then it's a little thank you for coming to our workshop today. And if you have more questions, just shoot me an email. You can reply to the auto ones that you got with the Zoom link, or just like, go to our website, put in a little contact form. If you have more questions, if you have topics that you want us to cover, we like to do these around once a month if we can. Then, yeah, I mean, we're doing them for you. So if you have ideas, we are all ears. And love the turnout. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, here's one from Stu. I'm going to copy that as well. Brilliant. This is about protein. I think Stu sent this as a direct message, but it's a really good idea about a protein content. So I will put that on the list. But thank you everyone for coming. And more questions, reach out anytime. Sue says, thank you for today's workshop. Yes, thank y'all. People from all over. Nice to meet you. And yeah, anything I'm missing, Coach Zoe?
No, I will echo everything. Thank you for everyone who attended and stayed engaged and asked questions and helped us bust some myths.
Bust some BS. That's what we do around here.
We love it. We love it.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We will see you soon, hopefully. Keep in touch. Thanks for asking really good questions. Love it. We'll chat soon.
Okay.